Thank you for joining us for another CE National Digital Lab. My name is Eric Miller, and I'm the Director of Ministry Operations, and we are delighted that you are joining us today, whether you're joining us live on Zoom or on Facebook, or if you're watching this video on tape delay. Is that even a thing, tape delay? I don't know, on demand. If you're watching this on demand in a time that fits you, we're glad that you're tuning in today. I'm with Shawn and Tim Spankle, and these are two guys that are pastors. They have been pastors for well over a decade now for both of them, and they have ministries in a small church. And I'm excited about this conversation today because they offer unique perspective. God is using them in powerful ways. And so maybe if God has called you to a small church, or you're struggling with the fact that you have a small church, we hope that this video will be an encouragement to you today. And so we're going to dive into this conversation a little bit. Let me introduce our guys and just kind of let them share a little bit about their story here. So Shawn, why don't we start with you?
Sure.
Shawn, and your wife is Stacia. Am I saying that correctly?
You are. Yep. Good job.
Good. You guys have 4 kids.
Most people get it wrong.
There you go. 3 boys and a girl. Shawn is the lead pastor at Grace Community Bible Church in Philadelphia. Big city, small church, right? I just recently even out there and got to meet with you and enjoyed getting to see your church and hear what you guys are doing and how God's using you. So Shawn, why don't you just briefly tell us a little bit about your role, how long you've been there, and even kind of give us an idea of your average attendance, and we'll go pre-COVID because that's just
right.
all the statistics. So.
Yeah, sure. I've been here attending here for 22 years, actually. I was one of the first ministry coordinators down at Urban Hope when they started in Philadelphia, and our team of people attended here because the church wasn't planted yet down there. And so we attended here and were involved in ministry here, and then transitioned into the associate pastor after a couple of years, and then the senior pastor. So I've been the senior pastor for about 18 years now here at the church. And so seen the church go through a lot of wonderful change and transition to the church that God has it to be today. And it's a blessing to be able to be part of a small church in a large city. And it's great to be able to be part of this conversation too. But that's who I am, and been here for quite a while.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Shawn, for joining us. I love that you guys, really everybody who's been on our digital labs in some way or another has close ties with CE National, because we want to be a ministry that partners with local churches to help equip and give ministry experience. So Tim, you're no newcomer to this either. Tim's been involved with Momentum as writing the rewind for the sessions, and that's been a powerful thing to offer to people. But Tim, you're better known as the lead pastor at Leesburg Grace Church in Indiana, which is not a big city. So Tim, why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about your role there and just how long you've been in the church as well?
Sure. Well, actually, even how you define my role is a bit debatable. It's because I have this debate with some of my other pastor friends. I have a friend who's a lead pastor because he has staff members, and we think he's exceptional. I have friends who are senior pastors because they're older. I am a proud solo pastor, which means I'm the only guy here. I've been at Leesburg for 13 years. Leesburg is a small town. Residents of maybe 600 people in the town, and then it spans out. There's lake town around it and farmland around it. So a lot of people say they're from Leesburg, but I think of the small town as 600 people. And my church probably pre-COVID was creeping over 100 pretty regularly, about 105. And we got all generations, all walks of life here. And it's been a great congregation to do life with. Even to do life with during the past 4 months, it's been encouraging to see them mobilized naturally, just mobilized and caring for each other. And I like being smaller because it's flexible. We'll get into some of those things later, what we like about being smaller and what's challenging about it. But that's a little bit about my context. Small farm town. I've been here 13 years, and I am the solo guy.
Very cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us. I really am excited. As we were talking a little bit ago, just about the context of this conversation. I think sometimes in ministry, maybe not even sometimes, oftentimes in ministry, we compare ourselves. We compare our churches, we compare our talents, abilities. That's our human nature. It's how we're wired. It's sin nature kind of plays into that as well. I think the enemy often wants us to get down on ourselves, to realize like God's not using you, and for that to be a paralyzing thing. And so I just want to be clear. Our goal for this conversation, this discussion today, is to partner with pastors who are ministering in a small church, and to bring encouragement, and to realize that look, it's not about the context of your church. It's not about where you live. It's about looking for ways that you can join God in the work that he's doing and be on mission for him and use the gifts, the strengths, abilities that he gives to us. So whether you live in a small town like Tim or a large city like Shawn, if your church is under or around that national average of 75 attenders, I think these days post-COVID, nobody knows what size our churches are. We hope that you'll find this conversation thought-provoking and helpful, of great encouragement to you. So want to make mention of a couple of things. If you're watching this video with us live, I know we've got a few attenders here in Zoom. If you have questions that through the conversation, if they pop into your head, drop those in the Q&A box or in the chat box for us here. If you're watching, maybe you're eating lunch and you're watching on Facebook, we'd welcome you to ask questions. So drop those in the comment box and they'll get over to us as well. So let's dive in. Why don't we started just briefly with introductions, how long you guys have been at your church. Give us kind of what's your church's like vision, mission statement? What are kind of your aim or your goals, if you would? Staff size, if Tim, you kind of already led to that. Even your primary like ministry scope and the size of the community that you're in. Kind of give us some of those details. Tim, why don't we go back to you and start there, pick up where you left.
Let me just recite the mission statement of our church. It's every Leesburg Grace member becoming full in Christ, united in love, and strong in service. And we drew that from the book of Ephesians and Colossians, and it's essentially what every other church wants to do in the world. We want to grow in our life with Jesus, grow in our connections with others, and have an impact in our community. Each year, I also pick an annual theme. And so this year it was immersed, and it was talking about how we're relying on the Spirit. We're partnering together with the Spirit in serving. Because I identified in our church, really great at community life. People like to be together, but service isn't always a strong point in the community. And so hoping that theme would get us into more of a service mindset. So each year for the past 3 years, I've been picking a theme that just kind of keeps us motivated so that the mission remains the same, but it gives us something to rally around each year. And I do have some elders at our church. I do have a couple different ministry teams here. We have a leadership team. We have a stewardship team. So the stewardship team cares for building and budget and those kind of issues. The ministry team, our leadership team, is people who are leading in various areas: youth ministry, children's ministry, worship team. It's pretty much all volunteers, and we get together every month or every other month, and we talk through the vision of the church, where we want to go. Honestly, if I was to boil it down to one thing, and this is way overly simplistic, but I think it's the heart of the Apostle Paul's teaching and Jesus's Great Commission, I want people to become more and more and more and more like Jesus. And I think if we become more like Jesus, mission naturally flows out of that, because he was very mission oriented, and love for others flows naturally out of that. And so that's my heartbeat personally as a pastor, is spiritual formation and development, and doing that in community.
Very cool. That's awesome. Shawn, what about you? What are kind of your scope, your goals, your values?
Yeah, pretty much the same heart. And as I'll start with, our mission statement is basically 4 words. It's loving God and loving people. And it's based on the great commandment to love God with our whole self, our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then to love your neighbor as yourself, and also on the Great Commission to, love those around us through reaching out in community. And so we break down that statement. How is it that we love God with our whole self? And how is it that we show the love that he's shown us to those around us? And so we base it on those 2 things. And our heartbeat is to really cause the people of the church to really have a strong love for God and then what that looks like. And not just a love for God, a strong love for one another within the body, and a strong love for community, because our communities so desperately need Jesus. And we're seeing some of that great need being voiced all around us today through media. And it's always been that way. But to really cultivate within the people of the church that strong love for God and that strong love for one another and for their neighbor, for others. And so we too pick a theme every year and put it on a banner and put it in front of our sanctuary right behind the pulpit. And this year's is Grow in All Things. It's Paul's call to the church of Ephesus to just grow up into spiritual maturity, leave spiritual infancy, grow up into spiritual maturity in every area of the Christian life. And we've been looking at during our sermons the different areas of the Christian life on growing into spiritual maturity. And the one we're targeting, actually starting this week, is growing our ability to defend our faith. And so we're going to get into some apologetics and arm our people on how to defend the faith. And because that's really important in a community of the city where there's so many different opinions and voices out there. As believers, we need to be able to be strong and loving, but be able to defend what we believe and to stand up for God's truth when everything around us is saying what is right is now wrong and what is wrong is now right. We need to be able to be good advocates and ambassadors of Christ and stand up for the truth. So we're going to do a lot of digging into more apologetics types things to defend faith, but to do it in a spirit of love and kindness and gentleness. You know.
Oh, that's wonderful. So as I'm listening to both of you kind of sharing your scope, your call, what your ministries are about, what you want your church to be and do, it sounds very similar to a lot of other churches that are biblical. We're a part of the Charis Fellowship of Churches. In the Charis Fellowship, there's really small churches. There's really large churches. My wife and I just joined the Grace Church of Greater Akron, which we're attending the Bath campus. It's probably the largest church in our fellowship. And yet, exactly what you guys are saying is so on point with everything in all of our churches. So what do you guys do in response to that thought process that some churches are small because they aren't effective, or maybe because they don't have a track to run on? I mean, what you guys are saying, and I know you both well enough to know I've listened to your messages. You know, you guys are good communicators. You're teaching biblical truth and application, the same as a lot of our other guys. So what do you do with that thought process?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Tim. I was like, I can.
Well, I was just going to say it's a good question. I fight my ego a lot. I fight my ego. I recognize my place. I am called to a certain place and the people surrounding us. Now it's a little different today because we have a digital audience that's getting much broader than what we've had before, and we've had limited tools, and we haven't really tried to develop some of those tools, some of our online presence. So we're a little late in the game in some of that. So now we're messing around with new tools. But I think the churches that are bigger, sometimes they're placed in more strategic locations as far as reaching larger groups of people. I think that they're probably better at using some modern tools. I think that some people are just more visionary than I am. I'm not a great visionary. I'm a great pastor. I don't know that I'm always a great leader or rallier of people. I like to sit and listen and ask questions and validate people. I get tired of repeating the same visionary statement or these are our values over and over again. But when I hear some of the pastors or leaders of larger churches, they're exceptional at that. And it really gets the people organized around different ministry opportunities, different mission outreach projects. I'm just not great at that. So I think some of it goes to those leadership skills that are really part of someone's life and ministry more than they are in my life and ministry. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as Tim said, we have to put our pride aside sometimes and fight our own pride, our own self-centeredness, and trying to project something, to others that, is not the case. And so we have to put our pride aside And but I'll tell you, it's a wonderful blessing to be part of a small church. It really is. We'll get into that. But is that statement true? At times it can be true. A church can be small because it's ineffective. Yes, obviously that can be true. A leadership and a church can become inward and lose their heart, lose their focus, lose their calling and their vision for community. And that obviously can cause or affect the attendance and the membership there, and its effectiveness in reaching people for Christ. That definitely can play, but that's not always the case. And there are a lot of wonderful smaller churches that are obedient. Really what matters, the size of the church doesn't matter. It's the obedience, the matter of obedience that really matters. And so that's what we see in the Word of God. And so in a lot of cases, like for instance, our case, there's a lot of things in community that are out of our control as far as size of the church. I'm also not like one of those wonderful leaders and visionaries, that you see in other churches. But there's also other things involved in church growth that we can't control. Like in my neighborhood, about 20 years ago, the neighborhood I'm living in was an upper middle class white neighborhood, very stable. People would come, buy a home, raise their families. Their kids would buy the home from the parent, raise their families and kids in that same home, and you'd have generation after generation in the same home. It was a very stable community. Well, just before I got here, that began to change. Neighborhoods and cities are always in flux and transition. And so what happened was you had a lot of diversity begin to move in the neighborhood. And then a lot of the stability of people staying left. The average family now stays in my neighborhood 3 years, 3 to 5 years. It was 3 years about 2 years ago. I think it's settled a little bit. And so it's 3 to 5 years. We're like an airport now. People come in, they land for a few years working, they get a little bit of money, they're out the suburbs, in, out, in, out. And the average family literally is 3 to 5 years. I forgot to say it at the beginning, but our little community, 2 mile square of us is 100,000, got to be well over 100,000 people in our 2 mile square. There's lots of people, over 400 churches in that 2 mile square. I mean, there's tons of people. Not all of them are biblical churches, but because of the nature of the transition of the community, that's something we can't control. So we have to adjust our method to match that dynamic of our community. And so every year we lose about a third of our church. So when you're 85, ours was 85 attendance, pre-COVID, that was our average weekly attendance, around 85. We'll drop to 60 some every year. But God always builds it back up. People come in, go, come in, go. So, and they're just moving to the south, they're moving to the suburbs. It's just the nature of life in our community. And so it's to say a church is ineffective because it's small is not necessarily true. Size does not necessarily matter. It's the obedience, the heart of that church that really matters. Yes, it can come into play, if we lose our heart and our focus, but you can be on mission, you can be a visionary, and God still has it to be a smaller church.
Yeah, that's so good. Because I mean, biblically, we're all called, to make disciples, whether you're a pastor, whether you're a follower of Christ. And yet there's a different layer or different level of calling for those of us who are pastors and who have that shepherd leader mentality and mindset. And you guys are exactly right. It's to be obedient to what God has called us to do. And oftentimes that's where he's placed us, where we will be most effective. And so it would be wrong for us to fight that or to try to go somewhere else for the fame or prestige or power or whatever. It sometimes can play a part in that. So I appreciate you guys just sharing that. Let's kind of turn the corner here in a way, but how have you guys felt pressure in culture today with leading a small church? Maybe comments that people have made, or maybe if you can describe, a word or a feeling that would help shed some light into somebody else maybe who's wrestling with that.
I'll say three things real quick. The first pressure I feel is there's not a lot of great Christian literature on leading smaller churches. And so anytime I go to a conference, a leadership training, or pick up a book, it's usually written by someone who's been successful, which typically means that they're leading a larger church, which typically means they're in a context that's different than mine. Ministry context, I'm not even saying where they live. So I have to recontextualize everything that's written. And everybody has to do that to a degree when you're reading something, but I'm constantly feeling the need to take what other people teach about what they're doing and recontextualize it to this really small situation. So that's one pressure. Another pressure is owning limitations. Like, I think when you have a broader base of people, you probably have a broader base of talent, which means you can produce better music, teaching materials, videos, etc. And it just looks more attractive to outsiders, I'm guessing. So I have to balance, like, well, we're authentic because we're not that great at a lot of things. And there's a sense where that's actually really welcoming. And on the other hand, like, I want to constantly get better at anything we're doing. So balancing that authenticity and awkwardness with like this push to get better, even though we don't always have the better resources, at least the base for that. So that's a tension that I feel. And then I think the other tension that you feel these days is when you're online, you feel like you can reach a broader audience, but online success often results from marketing. And there's a savvy that comes with online marketing that is a skill, and some people have it, or because you have a really good network of people who share things. And I feel like, oh, man, I want to share some of my stuff, or I want some of my stuff to reach this broader audience, but my marketing skills and my network isn't all that strong. And so just fighting this, like, I want to reach a broader audience, but I don't have the marketing skills, or does that even matter? So those are the three tensions I feel.
Nice. Yeah. Shawn?
Yeah, like you said, Tim, in culture, success many times is seen as size, or the amount of different types of ministries you offer to families and things like that. And when you're part of a smaller church and you're out and about, and you have a chance to meet with people, and they say, "Oh, you're a pastor? Oh, great." Usually the first question is, how many people go there? So, "Oh man, I got 85 awesome people coming to my church. It's a wonderful church. Love me back." "Oh, okay." Then the next question is usually, "What kind of ministries do you offer for this?" And so a lot of times you feel that pressure that people might be looking at you as if you're not a good leader because your ministry's smaller. And like we said earlier, you have to get over your own pride, because they just don't understand what the dynamic is. And so I don't feel that pressure much in my neighborhood. I'm out and about, talk to people. We're well known in our community, and I don't feel that pressure from our community at all. It's usually when I'm out and about somewhere else and I get to know people, and then I talk to them and they share that, and you can kind of see, oh, okay. They don't say it, they don't voice it, but you can kind of see it in their eyes, like, But another one, attention, and this is not because of the other people, it's because of myself. Sometimes when you go to a ministerium or something, and you're sitting with all the other men with the other churches, and they're going around the room and sharing some of the awesome things God's been doing in their church. And, then you have the opportunity to share what God's been doing in your church. And it might seem small in comparison to those other churches. And so it's not less important. It's just as awesome. It's just as big. It's just as has great eternal value to it as all those others. But in my own heart, I have to get rid of my own pride and self-centeredness and be proud of what God is doing there, and not try and sugar it up to make it look bigger than it is, so that my fellow pastors think, better of me. You know what I mean? It's not something that they put on me. That's something that's within me, that natural tendency to want to, and it's like, I can't do that. I can't do that. Fight it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Shawn, I think you're exactly right, because you're speaking to in a part of all of us I don't care what size church you have. It doesn't matter what ministry or location you're in. Like, I think we all feel that. I mean, even being a youth pastor for 15 years, like I always, Tim, I resonate with you. Like, I want to get better. I want to be more effective. I want to reach one more person for Christ.
Yep.
And that then I think sometimes can create this comparative nature. We see it in culture, in the secular world. We're human beings. It plays into that. And I think for us just to be aware and to allow the Spirit to convict us of that and not get too either deflating or negative or prideful and boastful about it. And so having a healthy biblical perspective on that matters, regardless the size of your ministry or church and any of that. So that's
and what falls into that mindset is the natural tendency to want to compare. Like someone said, "Oh, we had 200 baptisms on Easter Sunday, while we had 6 the whole year." It's like that you want to fight that. And that's just as awesome. God's doing an amazing work, in those 6 people's lives. You don't downplay that, but our human tendency is to try and compare. You can't do that. You have to stay away from that trap.
But regardless, those are still we're celebrating. I mean,
amen. Exactly.
We want to celebrate that because it's making disciples and being a part of that process.
Yeah, one of the things that I was doing during COVID was a Facebook Live prayer time for people in my church. And I'll tell you, one thing that's really demotivating is when you glance up in the top left corner of your screen and you see there's one eyeball, and then you close your eyes to pray, and when you open it up, there's no eyeballs. I mean, that happens when I'm doing. And I told my wife, she was in the room with me, and Eric, Liz says hi, by the way. I told my wife, she was in the room one time when I was praying Romans chapter 12:1, where we were offering our bodies as living sacrifice. So for 40 minutes, we prayed through different parts of our body and just dedicated our whole selves to God, which sounds really weird. It was one of the most powerful prayer moments of my life. And I told my wife, I said, I feel more pastoral doing these online prayer things than a lot of other stuff I've done in 13 years. And there is one eyeball. But I look over and my wife's got tears in her eyes and she goes, I needed that so badly. So metrics can be really helpful. They can also be very misleading. And remember that every metric, there's a real human being that stands behind it, who is made in the image of God, who is being remade into the image of Jesus Christ as we serve them. It's important.
Amen.
Yeah, that's so true. And Tim, you're not alone, because CE National is a national organization. And there have been some of these digital labs where it's just me and the panelists, and that's okay. But because you never know what God's going to do with it. And again, I think when we're obedient to do what he's asked us to do, it's for a purpose. It's for a reason. And so you're exactly right. Another question, even as you guys were just mentioning that, like, and Shawn, you were talking about kind of knowing the context and the culture of your community that's around you. So how do you guys focus your methods and the mission of your church based on the context that you're in, or even the size of your church? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, we developed a philosophy that's working well, and that is do a few things very well. Because in a small church, when I first came, everybody, usually you have a core group of people that does most of the work. And that might be true in all churches, I don't know, but you have a core group of people that does a bulk of your work, at least within our church. And so what was happening is all these people were working and getting burned out, filling that calendar with all these events and things like that, ministry opportunities and things like that. Wasn't necessarily bad, but what we were finding is that everybody was burning themselves out. They were coming to church, you could see their attitude just kind of deflate. They're getting grumpy when they're around people, getting frustrated that not other people are helping. And so what was happening, it was just, and then they would quit the ministry that they were leading and say, oh, I'm just exhausted, I can't do it. And so it was just not accomplishing what the goal was. And so we realized we have to focus our ministry efforts to do a few things and to do them extremely well. What are the main things that we need to be doing as a church that are meeting the needs of God's call for the church, meeting the needs of the people, of the dynamic that he's brought together at this place, and the needs of the community? Focus on those few things, do them extremely well. And as God brings other people that we can develop into leadership that will be willing to take on other types of ministries, then we'll add and support and bring oversight to that ministry. But until that time, do a few things and do them really well. One of the things that, for an example of that, is we used to do VBS, and we did a fabulous VBS, even a small church. It was out of the park, building sets and everything for every night. I mean, wooden sets, painting them all up. As soon as VBS ended, the director would start planning the following year. It was hours and hours and hours, and it was wonderful. And it did a great thing. But what we were finding was it wasn't accomplishing our purpose of bringing in the community people. All that work, all that effort, all that money into that week-long, 7-day a week, 3-hour a night, VBS. And what was happening is, yes, our own children from our church were getting that, which was great, the few that we had. But what was happening is all the other churches in the neighborhood, we were basically having VBS for all the other churches. And they've all had the same VBS. So they're coming in, they've already been through the same VBS 3 times. So they come in, have all the Bible verses, they take all the prizes, and no community people were coming, very many. You know what I mean? We'd have a few, but not like we were wanting. So you know what? Let's stop doing VBS. It's wearing us out. A lot of time and effort. We can do something smaller, but maybe it'll be more effective. So we added community movie nights, 1 night a month for 3 months in the summer, June, July, August. Then September, a block party. They're all 1-day events. Minimal staff is needed to help run it. But we were getting on those 3 movie nights, we would get hundreds of people, and most of them are from the community. Each night, 200 people watching a movie on our lawn. You know what I mean? And all of them are from the community. So we're handing out free kids' books, blankets, food, snacks, all that. And such minimal effort and not many people involved, and it was accomplishing more than what we wanted. And so that was one of the things that we did to adjust the size of our church for the ministry. And it's really worked out well for us. And we had to do it in discipleship too, because of the nature of our transitional community, people in and out so much. We had to funnel down our discipleship from 5 years to 2 years, and really focus on the fundamentals of the Christian faith. Because we realized that when people are coming to us, they're coming with a lot of different religious backgrounds. They're coming from the Catholic Church. They're coming from the Episcopal Church. They're coming from Methodist Church, Lutheran Church. Many of them really don't know the fundamentals of the Christian faith. So while they're here for the 1.5 to 2, maybe 3 years, because they don't always get here the first year that they're in the neighborhood. So we need to be able to what can we do to pass on to these people? We're such a small part of their life. How can we invest in them? So it was like, we need to be strong in building into them the fundamentals of the Christian faith. And so that's what we focus on that way.
I love that. I love that, Shawn. Well done. Tim, what about you? What does that look like in your context, those missions and methods?
Yeah, I like trying new things. I like innovating. It energizes me. I don't always like following through. So we've tampered with a bunch of different outreach ideas. What I have found in my years here that what works best for us, for our congregation, because I want to measure success at 2 different levels. One is, did this connect with the community? And then, did this equip my spiritual community? And a lot of times we're looking straight to the first metric, like how many people showed up from the community. And we've had a pretty poor track record of getting a ton of involvement from the community with some of our outreach events. But the more people from our church that we get involved, I can see that as a win too, because we're trying to equip the saints for the work of the service. So one of the things I'm looking at is how do you help other people realize their ideas? I found over the years that when it's my idea, it maybe works once and then it tanks. If it's other people's ideas, they'll rally their own friends and they'll have more energy behind it. So how can I help other people realize their ideas? How can I help other people work within their area of passion? Because the burnout thing is real, Shawn. I fight against that all the time. I don't want anyone to feel burned out at church. The other thing that I've had to think through as it relates to mission and methodology, including like keeping it simple, like what you were saying, Shawn, was I really want to make sure that we're okay letting things die and not doing things just because we've always done things, and helping people realize that that church ministry isn't just what happens in the church, that our church is serving in the community as people from our church work in the community. And so everyone has a sphere of influence. And we try to use that phrase quite a lot. When we do outreach events, we have shirts that say show care to show Christ. And that show care to show Christ, that show is a acronym that we could, there's a church in a huge church in Chicago. They have the blessing, and they made an acronym out of that. So we did show, and it means everyone has a sphere of influence. That's the S. H is hospitality, or hear their heart. O is I think I'm getting this wrong. Words of hope is the W, and then O is offer help or hospitality. It's something like that. So it's been a while since we've been doing like organized outreach events. But the idea with the show care to show Christ is everybody recognizes they have a sphere of influence. As a church, we have a sphere of influence, but every believer has a sphere of influence. So I want people to realize that when they leave our church, they're actually on ministry just as much as when they would come to our church building for an outreach event. I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, and Tim, I actually think that's a beautiful example, because you're not the primary person that owns that. And so your point is that, you know, you've got people who've bought in, and that I think is exciting. And the other thought I just had listening to both of you share is like, these are biblical principles that every church has to wrestle with, that every church needs to think through. Again, the size and context, it doesn't matter. It's what are you doing that is being effective and joining God in where he's working. And so both of you have alluded to this, but I want to just be very clear. What are some of the big things that you're seeing God do in your small churches? Because I'm hearing bits and pieces of them, but just, you know, brag on the Lord for a minute here.
On Sunday, after I finished a sermon, a guy he comes intermittently. He's newer to our country. English is not his first language. He came up to me afterwards and he said, he goes, God's been pushing me. I want to get baptized. He comes from a Catholic background, but for some reason, the message on Sunday really connected with his heart and pushed him to that next level. That was super encouraging. That's a big thing. That's life transformation. I got another guy who's been looking for work for months and months. And as soon as COVID rocked our world and he knew that it was going to be harder to find a job because lots of people were losing them, we had people come to his house and drop off food. I mean, he's newer to our church. Since the beginning of the year, people dropping off food at his house, gift cards, praying for him. So 2 weeks ago, I got a thank you card from him and his family. Just thanks for the way the church has supported us in the midst of this. To me, that's a big thing. That's how the community lives out the one another's. So that's very exciting. And then we had a small group gather for the Charis We Are One event. One of the couples that came has just started coming to our church in the past 3 weeks, which is like weird. I was talking to some other pastor. Are you getting new people to come? It's like, I've actually found that we're getting 65 to 70% of our people are coming to on-site worship, which I think is better than in the larger churches. Because our online stream probably isn't as good, and because we're just used to being together. Like you can fit 100 people in a room pretty easily, socially distanced, the way ours is set up. So we're getting a lot of people coming back, but we're also seeing new faces. And so this couple came to the We Are One celebration just because, and they're just trying to find ways to get connected to our community. So I mean, I could give you more stories and examples, but people getting involved, people feeling blessed, people wanting to get baptized and make a public commitment to Jesus. Those are great stories.
That's awesome. That's so cool.
Huge. Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, when I was thinking about this question, you know, looking over the years of those 20 some years, just really 4 things kind of resonated. I'll try and be quick at them. But one was a huge thing that God does every single year. is allows us to remain open and be a light in this community. With such a high turnover rate of people in our neighborhood, if we don't do outreach, we are literally 0 people but my family in 2 years. So just year after year after year, the faithfulness of God to allow us to remain open and be a light for this community in that short span of their journey with the Lord is amazing. And so I just praise God for that big blessing. And also the giving of the people, the financial giving. We're a small church, but they're humongous givers. And even during this time of quarantine, our tithes went up. We were going to be a few $1,000s in debt if our tithe didn't pick up a little bit at this time. They picked it up. You would think when we're not meeting, it would go down, but it went way up, and we're just where we need to be. We're week to week in our giving. You live on that tension, as a small church. Every week, what came in? Do we need to hold this, hold that, pay this? Our financial administrator guy is awesome in carrying that every week. But just the huge heart that the people of the church have to give towards God's church here at Grace Community Bible Church. It's amazing. And, it's a lower middle class community. And a lot of people are on fixed incomes or on government assistance and things like that. And they're huge givers. And I'm full time. That's amazing to me. I tell them all the time, I say, I'm ready to get a part-time job if I need to, but people keep just giving and giving and giving, and I'm able to remain full-time. And so that's a huge thing that God does all the time. And then another one, obviously, just the growth in people's lives, as Tim talked about, just to be able to see how when people come in and they begin to gain a hunger for God's word, and when that hunger for God's word begins to get into their lives, you see the rest of their life beginning to fall into place. Their marriages begin to get better. Their relationships with their kids begin to get better. Relationships with their spouse, with their spouses or family, brothers, sisters, things like that. Personal sin they're able to work through. Just the victories of what God does in the people's hearts is huge. I just continue to praise God for what he does in people's lives that way. And it's just beautiful to be a part of that, isn't it, Tim? Just to be able to see that and to help people walk through that transformation and to see that love for God to begin to grow in them and to see their marriage begin to be the satisfying, fulfilling marriage that they've always wanted but really never experienced, and seeing that come together, and things just begin to make sense as they follow after God, and God begins to put things back together for them. It's beautiful. And then just our church, just the love that they have for one another. Our church is one of the most diverse community. It is the most diverse community in Philadelphia, one of the most diverse communities in the country. And we literally have all the nations of the world in my neighborhood. You saw a little bit of that, Tim, when you were, Eric, when you were here. And so just to be able to see literally a snapshot of the world right in our little congregation and how they love one another, accept one another, even with such diversity of background and culture. It's beautiful. It's beautiful.
That's very cool. So as you guys are thinking through context, and I know we've talked before we hopped on this call and went live, but what would you guys say? What are some things you want to share with our viewers? What are the benefits of having a small church? And maybe on the flip side of the same coin, what are some of the challenges that you've faced in having a small church? What would you guys say to that?
I would say that the challenge first is, fighting a cultural lie that size or numeric growth equals success, and that I am called to faithfulness, and I feel like God has called me to a long walk in the same direction, to borrow Eugene Peterson's phrase. And he's been life-giving to me as a as a mentor. When I read his material on pastoral ministry, my heart comes alive. I'd love to read something of his that kind of gave me, can I do that?
Yeah, please.
It's a fairly short quote. It's from Christ Plays in 10,000 Places. He's writing in here about the importance of place. And when I read this, it clicked in my head. And God said, you stay where you're at. You stay where you're at your whole life. And it actually explains why I love being at a smaller church in a smaller town. He says Gregory of Nyssa, which is a church father, lived in Cappadocia in the 4th century. His older brother Basil, a bishop, arranged for his brother Gregory to be appointed bishop of a small, obscure, and decidedly unimportant town of Nyssa. It could read Leesburg, Indiana, but it says Nyssa. Gregory objected. He didn't want to be stuck in such an out-of-the-way place. His brother told him that he didn't want Gregory to obtain distinction from his church, but rather to confer distinction upon it. That is a powerful statement. Gregory went where he was placed, and he stayed there. The preaching and writing that he did in that backwater community continues its invigorating influence to this day. And God has placed me in a spot where I can do these Zoom meetings, where I can write momentum curriculum, where I can keep up a blog, where I can speak to a youth group this coming weekend, where I got a chance to do a little bit of publishing for a commentary, where I get to speak into a much larger community because I'm planted in this really small community. The flexibility and the freedom that I have as a minister is profound in this location. But also the fact that I can look at these people. When I first came, some of these kids were 3rd graders. I've done 3 or 4 of their weddings. I know the stories. I might marry their parents at some day because God has called me to this place. And I don't have to fight to create intergenerational ministries. My church is an intergenerational ministry, you know? So there are profound opportunities that I have with the people in my church, but then broadening out because of the fact that this isn't an all-consuming machine that I'm trying to keep running. So those would be things that I say are great for my situation.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah. Shawn, what about you guys?
Yeah, part of the challenge, I guess, money and resources, man. No, that's always a constant thing in our small context here. But God always comes through and provides, which is a beautiful thing. And you always have things you want to do and do more, you know, but and it's one of those things that's a constant tension you walk with, you know, in small church ministry is money and resources. And another one, I don't know if Tim experiences this or not, but we have people come into our church quite regularly, new people, and they absolutely love the church, absolutely love it, and start to get involved in things like that. But then all of a sudden their attitude changes and they want to take over the ministry in the church, and then they start to cause division and things like that. I don't know if I'm sure larger churches experience that as well. My only context of pastoring is this one church, you know, this small church for 20 years. But I don't know if it's the size of the church. People think they come in and take over or what, but one of the challenges that we as an elder board are constantly having to do is to protect the body, protect the integrity of Christ, and protect the ministry from people that are coming in and trying to destroy it. It's a regular thing. It's weird. I don't know if it's because we're small or what, but it's a constant thing we have to stay on top of. And at first we were a little slow to respond to some of those things, and it would cause problems. And it was hard to undo some of those things. But now we've learned over the years that we got to be on top of it because, you know, the testimony of Christ and the integrity of the gospel is paramount. And so that's something that is a challenge for us almost on a monthly basis. We're constantly protect that part of the elder board responsibility, you know, of protection is a real thing here. And so that's something we have to do. But the benefit is, like Tim said, you know, you have wonderful opportunities to make real personal connections with all the people in your church as a senior pastor. and you have direct access to people, and you can have really close relationships with them. They're your best friends. They're they're the people you live life with and do life together with in a small church. And you just have that opportunity without trying to create the opportunity. It's just there. It just happens, and you have that opportunity to really make those close personal relationships with all the people. And that's a wonderful blessing and a wonderful benefit of our small church, is just those close personal relationships.
Yeah. I love hearing your guys's your shepherd hearts and your passion for what you get to do come through, because it's clear and it's beautiful. So thank you guys for sharing. I know our time is wrapping up here. Again, if any of our viewers have any questions, feel free to submit those. But I do have just one other question. So kind of in line with that shepherding, you guys have been in ministry for a long time. Give the guy who's starting out, right? Maybe somebody that's in that smaller church and they're frustrated. They're where you guys were before, of wrestling through that identity crisis, or the enemy whispering lies in their ear. What advice would you give to somebody who's doing ministry in a small church that maybe needs some encouragement?
I would say continue to be a learner, read a lot, talk with other pastors in contexts that are similar to yours, but also learn from people who are in different churches, bigger churches. Learn from their leadership style. Don't be intimidated by it. Actually celebrate it. That takes a while to learn, but I've learned to celebrate that, and don't create the dichotomy necessarily that a leader is not a shepherd or a shepherd's not a leader. Some leaders are really dynamic leaders, and some shepherds are a little bit more low key, but there's not necessarily a dichotomy there. I think I used to make that a striking dichotomy. I've loved Eugene Peterson's writing. He loves pastors. He is a huge fan of pastors. He did die a couple of years ago, so his writing's finished, but I read a lot of his and learn from him, and learn from listen a lot. I guess that would be the other thing I'd say. Just be patient and listen to what the Lord is telling you through his word. He wants to speak through his word. He doesn't want the sermon just to be something you do on Sunday. He wants the word to be something that speaks to you regularly, and the sermon something that touches your heart. And listen to him in prayer, and listen to other people. Everybody's got a story. Everybody in your church is a workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works. So what has God laid out for them? And ask them what they see God doing in their lives, and just be a listener.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, a couple things. One is try not to fall into the trap of comparing that we talked about earlier, because you can get discouraged and you lose sight of why God has put you where you are. And so learn to love where God has placed you. Be content. God has brought you there for a reason, because he wants you to be his advocate in that place, to shepherd those people through life and to help them know him in a deeper way. And be content with that. It's a beautiful thing. Try not to fall into the trap of comparing and contrasting things, because you'll only get discouraged. Fall in love with God's call upon your life and the people in which God has placed you, that community. But another one, as Brother Tim said, a support group of people outside of your church that can pray for you, that can support you, that you can be a sounding board to. Sometimes, I'm talking particularly to pastors and leaders of the small churches, you can't always share those types of things with some of the people within your church. Your elder board you can, but you might need a support group of people outside of your church to pray for you, that you can be a sounding board to. Talk about your frustrations and things like that, and they're not judging you for it. You just need to get it off your chest and to say it, cry over their shoulder, whatever it might be, just a support person, that you can share your struggles with or share your ideas with, ideas of ministry. And it's also another one, it's okay to let people leave your church. As a small church, we cannot be everything for everyone. And I've learned that it's okay if a family comes and you say, we love the church, but this particular church over here has this particular children's ministry that our kids love. We're going to start attending over there. Don't be offended by that. Don't be upset by that. Say, that's okay. You know what I mean? It's okay because we're all one in the body of Christ. It's okay if other people feel led to move on. That's not necessarily against you. It's just their needs for their family, and stick to the calling that God has called you to do. So with that, don't try and be everything to everybody. You will burn yourself out. You can't do it. And so just be okay doing what God has called you to do, and to do it with excellence. And as God brings people to your church, develop those people to lead those different types of ministry within the church, that then you can begin to start some of these other things. But it takes a long-term vision, not a short-sighted vision. You know what I mean? When I first came in, you have all these things, blah, 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 and it's like, wow, okay, slow down. You have to look at it more on a long-term perspective. And once you do that, you begin to see God do some amazing things. You get out of the way and God begins to just go. And so those are a couple of the things that I would encourage a person in a small church to do.
You guys you hit it out of the park, because you've shared some biblical principles, some leadership and pastoral gems that I think are applicable to any pastor, any ministry leader, regardless the size and context of their church ministry. So thank you both on behalf of our viewers. Thank you guys. This has been wonderful.